Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where I talk with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies and organizations, from YPO to EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And before I introduce today's guest, I want to give a big shout out to Marina Byzanova. Hopefully I'm saying that right. One of our past guests. Go check out brandofaleader.com. She was great, loved her energy, and she introduced me to today's guest, which is George Levesque. George is the president of Levesque Negotiation, a firm providing negotiation training and advice right out of my own heart, since I spent many years practicing law and studied negotiation. And he was so persuasive that he even helped guide what we're going to talk about beforehand. So we're going to talk about negotiation strategy a bit. He's also a senior executive with EF Education First, the world's largest educational organization with over 52,000 employees in 114 countries. He's also a longtime entrepreneur, professional speaker, and proud supporter of small businesses, been active in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a wonderful organization, has traveled over 100 countries. And in addition to being a lifetime entrepreneur, he also went to go work in a larger corporate environment. And that's where he really felt like he learned a ton. So we're going to talk about the differences between those two, and also had some real big personal challenges after selling his company, including going through a divorce. And we'll talk about how some of the entrepreneurial skills he'd learned helped him to climb out of that. But first, before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media, our company, which helps B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. If you want to learn more, go to rise25media.com. You can also email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, George, I'm so excited to have you. And this was a long time coming, working on getting this scheduled. And you've an interesting story, because you were graduating from college and you thought, here's what I'll do. I'll start an import-export company. That seems rather simple, right? I'm joking, of course. Like, how does one do that when they're graduating from college? Just go start something as complex as an import-export distribution company.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, John, and great introduction. There's no such thing as just starting. I think, like most entrepreneurs, I fell into it by accident. So after graduating from university, I got a job as an international fraternity consultant, and it was my duties to travel around our different chapters in North America. Talk about a fun
Going to
extension
fraternities?
to college life. Oh, yeah.
Oh, my
gosh. It was a full-time job.
That would have been a real problem for me if I had done. I don't think I ever would have emerged alive.
Yeah, my father at the time said, "That's not a job. That's just an extension of university, pal."
And they actually paid you? You actually got paid to do that?
Got paid, yeah. Had a place to live in Indianapolis. And it was my job to go make sure that the chapters were running properly, and we had good relationships with the alumni and the university, so on and so forth. And it was a great experience.
To sample the local culture and things like that.
Well, of course. I had to visit some of the pubs and make sure everything was running smoothly there. Wow. But it was fantastic. You know, as a young man, and particularly Canadian, the ability to travel to 30, 35 states and see the array of different cultural explosions was fantastic. I mean, I learned a lot by doing it. I was in small towns like Emporia, Kansas, and large ones like San Francisco, and all over the US. And it was very exhilarating. And a close friend of mine, a fraternity brother, had started a business based out of Vermont, and he was doing a trade show in New York. And at the tail end of my service, I met him there and just spend some time with him, go out, have dinner, help him out in his booth. And next door was a fellow who owned a company called Letico USA. His name was Paul. And after just striking up a conversation and deciding to have a couple of martinis in Manhattan that evening, we created Letico Canada. And I was to go up north with a new partner and start this import distribution business of leather goods, wallets, handbags, those type of things. I had absolutely no experience either in business or the import side, but I just got going in the trunk of my car with a dozen samples, and then moved back into my parents and started using their garage. And I would sell during the day, just walk into retailers and say, hey, I've got some things I'd like to sell you. Are you interested? And then in the evenings, I would ship the goods and then put up an order with Paul, and he'd bring him back up from the US. And we started very, very slowly that way. I think the first year we did $58,000 in sales. And the second year we were closer to 200,000. And then by the third year, I had pretty much taken over my parents' entire garage. My dad had to park the car outside and the lawnmower on the side. And
it's not good in Canadian winters.
Not good at all. He wasn't a big fan of that. But business was picking up, and we needed to keep costs low. And my mother had recently retired from teaching, so she became our receptionist in the kitchen. And we didn't put in a second line to save some money. So when she answered the house line, she'd answer Letico Canada, and my grandmother would say, "Oh, I've got the wrong number," and she'd say, "No, it's us, it's us." And so it just picked up momentum that way, and eventually. It grew to a level that we had to move out and get our own warehouse and an office space. And at that point, we had crossed over $1 million. And I was introduced to Entrepreneurs Organization in Montreal, which is, frankly, the greatest organization for entrepreneurs in the world. It's enormously.
I have to pause on one thing before we get into EO.
Sure.
I love, and I think this demonstrates maybe your negotiation prowess early, but you'd spent years traveling around the country as a consultant to fraternities, and you convinced this guy in the next booth over to go to let you head up starting up the Canadian end of his business. So why do you think that he saw that potential in you?
Well, he made the decision after 4 martinis, John. So that helped.
There you go.
But I also think we had a chance to get to know each other over a couple of days at this booth, and he was right next door to my friend's booth, and I think there's been a bit of a trust factor built up, and we just decided, hey, let's hop in. He had his own business for over a decade. He was a shrewd entrepreneur. He knew what he was doing, and I think it just helped out in sales and volume, and I learned a great deal from him. It was really a lot of fun.
Potential, I'm sure. And so you joined EO, and what was EO like? How did that help the trajectory of the business? Sounds like you were doing well.
We were doing well, but certainly not as quickly as we would have hoped, which is typical for a lot of entrepreneurs. And what I think EO did was just open up the world. The focus, certainly the breakdown in various kind of lines of learning, whether you do that at the chapter level, at the forum level, is enormous. And then building trust with your forum, which is a smaller subgroup where people meet monthly, and the discipline of putting not just kind of a focus on business, but a focus on yourself and your personal life was enormously beneficial. I speak the world of EO. I just think if you're an entrepreneur and you're doing at least $1 million, or now they have an accelerator program. So if you're doing at least 250,000, you can join the organization. They bring you up to $1 million. Is a necessity for everybody. And I think it does exactly what it's supposed to do, is support entrepreneurs. So after joining, shortly afterwards, I had an opportunity to buy out my US partner. We became very amicable over it. He was just still providing me with some goods, but now I could import from different places around the world. And
so
then
you could start importing from different companies. Then you weren't limited to just his supplies.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Correct.
And then did that allow you to grow the business further?
It did. And we grew quite rapidly from the late 90s to the early 2002, 2003. We went from 20,000 square feet to 45,000 to 60,000 square feet of warehousing. And we were selling a great deal to the large retailers in Canada, including the Hudson's Bay Company and Costco. And we were also selling about 35% to promotional products, which are distributors that just put their logos on your specific products and resell them.
Got it. And were you affected by the downturn after 9/11?
Was not at all. There was a bit of a dip in travel, so some of our areas were hit a little, but I think we weathered it quite nicely. We were on a nice growth trajectory. We had also done a merger deal with a Canadian wallet distributor, and that proved to be very positive for us, opened up a lot of new markets, and the business just continued to grow, and we were very pleased with the results.
Was that because of your products that you were in, or was the Canadian economy overall not as affected by the downturn after 9/11?
I'll tell it was the economy stayed pretty strong here after 9/11. We didn't face it the same way the US did. I think we had a competitive range of products, but I would say, John, our expertise was selling. We were excellent at relationships. Mm-hmm. I got the Costco contract because I must have called 80 times. And then I waited in the headquarters office for the buyer to show up. 7 hours. I sat there reading a magazine, and I had brought some candy to the receptionist and told her to let me know when the certain buyer would walk in. And I convinced her to give me 10 minutes, and that started a great multi-million-dollar relationship that lasted years. So we were very persistent. I think the people that had joined us, including my brother-in-law at the time, very, very good at selling and opening up some markets.
Mm-hmm. And you were self-taught in sales, right? Or had you ever done any training?
I had never done any training, nor had any formal business education or training itself. Although I'd learned a great deal from obviously EO and the chapter events on a monthly level. But for the most part, I'd learned on the fly, which was in hindsight a mistake, because I think I could have accelerated the growth and been a lot more strategic in the manner in which I drove the business if I'd had a little bit of training, which is what I learned a couple of years later.
So you get the business up to 14 million in sales, I believe,
Correct.
Around 2004. And then how did a buyer come along? Did you put it up for sale?
No, purely by accident, really. The business was doing relatively well. There had been a couple of periods of us struggling with liquidity. I think once I was way over leverage, and the banker was coming to have a tough discussion with me, but we had closed the office early. And then the weekend I was able to raise some money and put us back on the ratio. But I was in a restaurant with one of our agents, and we were talking about our different product lines, including one called Invicta, which was a company at the time that was very well known for their colorful Italian backpacks based out of Montebelluna, Italy. And unbeknownst to me, sitting to the table beside us were the owners of a company called Midway Industries, which was the largest fashion accessory company in North America, based out of Montreal. They have lots of different customer-facing brands, but they also do a lot of white label stuff for some of the largest retailers. And they were in acquisition mode. They were sitting on a pile of liquidity and wanting to grow in that fashion. So they at first approached us. They quite literally approached me at dinner, John, and said, "Hey, I heard you thinking. We've been talking. We've been talking about Invicta in our office, and wondering if you would sell us the rights to the license." And we started those discussions. And when they came in the office and started kicking the tires, they said, "Oh, well, would you sell us the whole thing?"
Wow. And, so had you considered selling at that point?
I had not. I mean, we had certainly, I had a partner at the time through our merger with Mundy, and we certainly, like most businesses, have gone through a rough patch, but we're bouncing back. The stress of the liquidity at times, because in the import distribution business, your biggest battle is always with cash, because you're outlaying 90 days before the goods even arrive, and then you got to wait 60 to 90 days to get paid. So if you're growing faster than your margin, then you're always trying to catch up to cash. But overall, it was quite stable at that time, and it was purely accidental. And they were incredibly reasonable, and I think we were also. And the negotiation itself, and funny you talk about that, maybe I wasn't as astute, and I certainly wasn't as astute as I thought I was, but only lasted about 20 minutes. I think we agreed to most of the terms very, very quickly. It just took 6 months to close, because we had 24 licenses and some complexities in lots of different areas. But
did you negotiate it all yourself then, or did you use any other M&A advisor or anything?
No, we did it all ourselves. I mean, this was in the day, of course, where it's not the multiple of revenue you see now in the digital space. It's based on factor off EBITDA. So it's, you get a payout, but it's certainly not enough to buy a private jet and couple of homes in Malibu and Paris. So we were quite realistic that that it was reasonable and it was a fair price. But no, we handled it all. And in hindsight, we might have gotten some advice, but it felt so good and comfortable, and that we stuck with it and we did it ourselves.
And did you stick around for long after that? Usually there's an earn out period.
6 months was the agreement.
And then did you want to move on at that point?
I did. I think I'd been doing the same thing for the last 12 years. And I was looking to maybe do some more interesting things, or at the time perceived it to be more interesting. My partner was more in the design and product side, and I was more in the sales and finance angle. And she, the buyers really wanted more design help. They felt that they were covered on the sales and business development front, and they certainly had a very astute finance team. So our agreement just said 6 months, and 6 months to the day, I walked out, shook their hands, and moved on.
And you then a while later were in Boston doing a sales talk, and you happened into what became your next opportunity.
Yes, it's actually quite interesting how life takes you that way. Now, the same fraternity brother who introduced me to Paul to start Latico was now working at a company called EF Education First. They're Swedish-owned, based in Switzerland, but with big operations in Boston. And he was running a division which provided school trips domestically in the US to middle school students. And he asked me to come down to give his team a bit of a rah-rah on sales, relatively small team, which I did. And then we had a chance to spend some time together, go for dinner and discover Boston a bit. And then unbeknownst to me, in that presentation was the president of the largest division at EF, who then called me back and hired me to give a sales talk at their kickoff that fall. And I was really quite impressed with the company, the setting, the people. And they called probably a month later and asked if I'd be interested in beginning to interview for a position there and try and support the organization and growth period.
And what was it like? You go to work for them. What was it like going to work in a larger corporate environment after having been your own boss for so long?
Humbling is the best way I could put it, John. I think if I could talk bluntly, I thought when I sold a company and I was playing poolside with the dogs, and I really thought I'd reached an apex and that I was really quite good. I built up a business over 10, 12 years, negotiated quite a few deals, bought and sold a few companies, was a member of EO, was on a few boards in the city, and I thought very highly of myself. And I think my thought process was, oh, look at them. They're going to come to get this expertise, this entrepreneurial genius who will then help them go to the next level. And what was interesting about EF is I had 7 interviews in 4 countries.
Wow.
And normally when I hired people in my company, it was a 30-minute interview and just my gut. Well, they didn't work that way. And that should have been the first sign that it's a level above. But the bottom line is, so they offered me this job, and they were a little cautious because I had never worked in the corporate world, and I had all the typical signs of entrepreneurial ADD. I was high energy. It was hard to kind of stay put, fast talking. And they said, look, why don't we do this for 6 months, and you can commute from Boston Monday to Friday. And after 4, we'll tell you if we're good, and you can move your family down and build up your career here. And otherwise you can just move on. And I thought that was a great setup. And then they did confirm and offer me a job full time after a few months. And then I moved down. But I got to tell you that January 2005, when I started there, it took, in my first day, I really thought I was hot stuff. And it took me about a week to realize that I was the dumbest guy in the building, that I was very unsophisticated in many areas. I knew nothing about analytics. Strategy was quite weak. My finance acumen was mediocre at best in comparison to certainly the people that were there. And I really struggled to understand. And I came to realize that I was just really a great sales person who built up the business by being able to sell like mad and put a ton of energy and work 80-hour weeks. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, my acumen was quite limited.
Oftentimes you hear about this. You hear about an entrepreneur, longtime entrepreneur joining a large corporate environment, and they chafe against that environment. But it sounds like you liked it. It didn't bother you.
It did. It was a little challenging at first, but they recognized that I could bring a lot of good, certainly a lot of energy and push on development. So they started to put me through training regimens. So I spent some time with folks that have analytics and more time with folks in finance and our human resources department. And then they said, hey, why don't you start taking some classes at Harvard and MIT because it's in town and we have an agreement with them. And so I started in essence to do a joint MBA. Which I never completed because we moved back to Canada before I could continue. I was just taking 1 or 2 classes, but it was there that I fell in love with negotiation. The first class with Manny Malhotra at Harvard, and then that was it. So then I started to apply that in my role at EF.
Got it. And I studied negotiation in law school also, and I remember it's like you've been seeing the world in black and white, and all of a sudden everything's multicolor. Once you start to really study and understand negotiation and the different styles of negotiation, was it like that for you?
Completely. I mean, the misconception is that negotiation is a natural skill. And I thought I was a born negotiator. And I was very proud of that. And then I quickly realized that it is not at all a natural skill. It's a learned one. We get trained and we practice. And we get better. And I quickly became almost enamored in the different types of personalities that taught negotiation at Harvard and MIT and how amazing they were, but didn't have the same personality types that you would expect from strong negotiators.
Like they weren't big salesy types of people, over the top kinds of personalities. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. But they understood how to get their way, I guess, in a sense, right?
They did.
Yeah. At what point did you decide, we're flashing forward a little bit in your career here, but decide that you wanted to teach others how to negotiate? Because that's a big jump from, I realize how much I don't know about negotiation to now I'm going to turn around, I'm going to show others, I'm going to teach others.
Well, I spent quite a bit of time in the late 2000s and early 2010s going back to classes, doing refreshers, and then going to the next level, advanced negotiation, labor negotiation, and so on and so forth. For quite a few years, John, I spent a week, a year at Harvard and would devour anything I could get my hands on or get trained on virtually. And I think by the time I felt I was getting pretty good at this, EF was also in a point where they needed to train more and more of their managers and directors, and I volunteered to do that, something we call the EF Bricks, and those seminars / classes became very, very popular, and I realized that I might have a capacity to do this. So by 2014, 2015, I started to do this on the side, and it's grown quite a bit ever since.
Yeah. And what was that program that you were doing at Harvard? Was it it wasn't the Entrepreneurial Master's program through EO, was it?
No, it's not. It's the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. And then they also have a subset at Harvard Business School, and they're certificate programs really, where it's 3 or 7 days.
And there are different styles of negotiation. Do you identify with a particular style for yourself personally?
Well, I adjusted really and focused a lot on what we call distributive negotiation, which is trying to find a way to expand the pie. So there's really 2 types, right? And the metaphor is that there's a pie, and you try to get the largest piece of that pie. So a one-time negotiation, which is typical, let's say, in buying houses or cars, where you don't have to have continued interaction with the other person. So you could really go as hard and aggressively as you can. But in a distributive negotiation, you have to take into account that you will continue to exist and coexist with the other side. So that's true in labor negotiation or acquiring companies or building up partnerships. And there's a lot of subtleties to that. So you want to try and grow the pie so that everybody has a bigger piece.
How did you, during this stage, this period of time in your career, you're learning a lot, you're kind of like a sponge. How did you reconcile the fact that you'd sold this business in the past and you kind of feel great about that, but then you kind of become the student again, and you're learning and at the same time you want to come into this business and share your knowledge and your worldview and all that kind of stuff. Because it's kind of 2 different things at once. So on the one hand, it's you're coming in, you're bringing your expertise, and then you realize how much you didn't know. Or was that just the culture of the organization where they embraced that?
Well, they embraced that, and it was tough learning feedback and the ability to be humbled is a keystone to growth at EF. But there was great surroundings. My first boss, which ironically was the first boss I'd really had in my entire life, except for a few jobs here and there, and maybe working for the fraternity, but in my adult life, certainly. And she was instrumental in guiding me through the process. That it's not as an entrepreneur, we become a central focus point of not just our business, but almost our worlds. And here I had to learn to work more collaboratively in a team and find ways to add value. So it was admittedly a tough transition, but and speaking with others who have followed similar paths, they all say that at one point you get mentors and people that help you through it. And I think that's what I was able to do there, and build up a pretty solid coalition of people to support. I had also, John, right at that point, discovered Robin Sharma, the writer and the executive coach. I think most of your listeners will be familiar with him.
Yep.
I had read The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Robin's also Canadian, and I happened to cross paths with him in Toronto quite a long time ago, and spend a bit of time with him and at this super entrepreneurship conference. And I think what I learned from Robin was not just the system of being efficient and not wasting time and getting the most out of yourself, but also that humility. I think until you can really reconcile that it's about serving and learning constantly, that you don't necessarily have all the answers all the time, and it's okay to lean on other people and just absorb that, show some weakness in it. I think then you become not just a better entrepreneur, but a better human being.
That's great. We're running a little short on time, but I mentioned at the beginning that you went through some personal challenges. You had a divorce. You were hospitalized at one point. Tell us about that period and how that came about.
Yeah, that's a long story, but I'll allude to it a little bit. I had been undiagnosed for a few years, suffering from various mental health issues, and they really came to the forefront 2014, 2015. And that led to really complications in some of my business affairs, a divorce, which in essence was a long time coming, and then some fragmentation with my family. And I found myself hospitalized in late 2016 with access to no resources. And when I say no resources, I mean, I left the hospital with 2 bags and $4 in my pocket. And
Had
a friend was gracious.
Lost everything, or you mean that you just didn't have access to it?
I just didn't have access to it. I had lost a good chunk of it, but I also just didn't have access. My behavior had been so off base that my family had just shut it off just until they could figure out what was happening, because it was very logical and I'd gone through lots of different things there.
Was there a bottom? Was there a moment where you hit rock bottom?
Oh, yes. And that was just prior to entering hospital, where I had just really given up. Like,
and what was it? What are the circumstances?
I had decided that I should find a way to end it, and I was walking through the woods in Western Montreal, and I was trying to figure out how I can
kill yourself,
off myself.
Wow.
And I was in a process of trying to really, it seems very blurry today, in hindsight, but I was in the middle of it. And then it was just by luck, a woman was walking by with her dog and scared me and liked me. And then that just led to a chain reaction that led me to hospital, spent a month there, and then just allowed me to get my bearings a little bit. And then with a lot of help and support, I was able to get my balance back. But I found myself really with virtually nothing and no access and cut off from family. And I don't hold that against them at all. I would have probably done the exact same thing. And that's probably a longer story than we have time for. But the point is that I had to start at zero in terms of getting some financial liquidity. So the one thing I still owned was a Breitling watch that had been a gift from my old partner, Paul. And that first morning out of hospital, I took the train in the city and sold it to a trader and was able to put a little cash in my pocket. And I got a cell phone, and then and then I got lunch at Burger King, which was a real joy because it was on sale. And then I just slowly rebuilt from there. And then family started to reconnect because my behavior started to be really constructive, and I started to get the help that I needed, and one step at a time. And I'm still making amends, certainly with some of my fellow EOers, which I hurt some of them, and I'm very sorry about that. But certainly with my family, ex-wife, kids, I've solidified, structured, and caught up on lots of different things. And proud that I was able to pull myself out. But I think the key point there was if I had not had entrepreneurial skills, I don't know if I could have come out of it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. So what in particular, what entrepreneurial skills can you refer to that helped you pull you out of this?
So first of all, resourcefulness, right? To work with what you've got, which is a great trait of entrepreneurs. And to also look ahead. So I had, as my head started to clear and I started to see things as they should be, I was able to think, okay, let's fix one problem at a time. So the first problem was I needed liquidity. I need to support as best as I can and eat and maybe support my ex-wife as much as I could. And so I quite quickly figured out a way to build a website on GoDaddy for virtually no money. And then just sell some of my negotiation training seminars, and then one with the TD Bank and another one, and there's 500 it comes in and 750, and then helping out and doing a free one for an event downtown, which leads to a company hiring me, and then one step at a time that way.
Wow.
And reaching out to people who could have used my services, but it was very grinding work, humbling, but also very empowering, because you were in control and you could take one step at a time and put the resources, and I did it all on my own.
You had a relationship with EF before and you have a relationship with them now. How did you maintain that relationship?
So I always remain in close contact after leaving. Part of the reason I left EF was that we just wanted to move to Canada, and they had no operations in Montreal, and I wanted to move on to different things. And as I started to get my equilibrium in 2017, I realized that the best thing to do would be just to get a good job and build some stability in parallel with my negotiation work. So I reached out to the senior executive team there, including the CEO, and incredibly, they were considering opening up a new division. And that what had been my job at EF through the better part of the 2006 to 2009 was to start new divisions, of which 3 were still operating with hundreds of employees in them. So they gave me a crack to do it a 4th time, and it was quite successful. And it's been a fun journey getting back in the saddle there.
It sounds like some of the key relationships have made a big difference for you at different pivotal points in your career. And that's one of the things that I love to talk about and focus on through this podcast. So, looking around at some of your peers who you know, who you work with now, or you've worked with over the years, who do you admire? Who do you respect? Who do you look to and you admire the work that they're doing?
This might sound a little corny, but my girlfriend, Paulina. So we met in 2017, and she's been incredibly supportive on all fronts, but she's an entrepreneur herself, owns a company called sossitter.ca, very similar to care.com, but mostly for the Quebec, Canadian market. And she always has something going on business-wise. She's sold tens of thousands of dollars of masks on Amazon through the pandemic. She had the first virtual babysitting platform in Canada. She continues to push on SOS Sitter. She does dresses for people because she's a seamstress. And she's just so an incredible amount of empathy and lovely, but always on the move, great energy, and a driver, really. And she came from being a single mom to building up a business, and I couldn't be more proud of her. I mean, she's an example for me every day.
Yeah. And what about in your EO community or through EF or anyone else there that you would acknowledge?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but at EO, and you might be familiar with this name, Warren Rustan.
Yes, I'm talking to him tomorrow, actually, about interviewing him for his upcoming book. I'm excited about that.
He is one of the greatest human beings alive.
Yeah.
His stories, and certainly the people he has helped, and the examples that he has set is a tribute to humankind. Really, he's an incredible mentor to thousands of people now, and I can't can't thank him enough for his guidance at times and what he's provided to EO members over the years. He's what a privilege for you to be interviewing him tomorrow. He's a great individual.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. This one has been months in the making. I've been slowly working my way across different circles until I could get to him. So I'm super excited about it. Last question I'll ask, which is, let's pretend that, George, that we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars, the Emmys. You are receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. And what we all want to know is, who do you thank? Family, of course, right? But in addition to that, who are the mentors? Who are the friends? Who are the business partners? Who are the investors, strategic partners? Who are the people along the way, the fraternity brothers that you would acknowledge in your remarks?
Well, funny you should say. So if I could just split it quickly into, I think the folks at EO Montreal, I want to thank them, and for some of them I need to apologize. But for the most part, I think the growth and the understanding there was key, and just not just life prior, but life post kind of recuperation. And they probably don't know it, but they were enormously instrumental. And jokingly, fraternity brothers, because it was my fraternity brother, Eric, who introduced me to my first business and then introduced me to EF. And both those things have been a positive add-on in my existence. So it's funny how the people you come across really make an enormous impact in your life.
You never know, right? You never know who's going to, the friend from childhood that you're going to know for life that's going to have the big impact on you. George, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you do?
They can go to Levesque Negotiation, so LEVESQUE negotiation.com.
Perfect. All right, George, thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.